A moment. There we go. Hello and welcome all. I'm Rajesh, joining you from Canberra. This is our first conversation featuring an Australian scholar. Hence, in keeping with the Australian tradition, let me begin by acknowledging the country. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm hosting this meeting from the traditional lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and I would like to extend this acknowledgement to all traditional owners of the various lands on which each of you live and work today. A brief introduction to this platform before handing over to the moderator. Consortium for Research on Innovation Studies, CRIS, is a voluntary online activity started in 2021 by a group of early career researchers, mostly alumni of Globalix competence building programs. Professor Lundwall is our patron. We started with a lecture series on innovation systems, commemorating the birth centenary year of Christopher Freeman, and continued beyond the centenary year due to popular demand. We ran several series for the benefit of early career innovation researchers, especially those from countries in the global south, where competence building opportunities are limited. In Conversation series was started with the objective of recording intellectual biographies of important innovation scholars as a learning material for students and for archival purpose. Our events are meticulously documented, and videos are made available free of cost on our website. We work on pro bono basis with zero funding. The Zoom platform and website have been sponsored by University of Malaya North-South Research Center, UMNSRC. In today's event, Mark Dodgson is interviewed by Andrew Davies. We have Ammon Salter, Tim Kastelle, and Marina Zhang as panelists. The session is moderated by Dilupa Nakandala. Before handing over to Dilupa, let me briefly introduce her. Dilupa Nakandala is Associate Dean, Graduate Studies, School of Business and Associate Professor of Management at Western Sydney University. She works on innovation and technology transfer management and supply chain management. Her research has been recognized by funding from Australian Research Council, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and Western Sydney University. She has published in top-tier journals, including Decision Support Systems, Knowledge-Based Systems, European Journal of Operational Research, Supply Chain Management Journal, etc. Over to you, Dilupa. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajesh, for the introduction and also inviting me to participate in this session. Hello, everyone. Warm welcome to the 17th session of the In Conversation series. It's a wonderful opportunity for all of us to listen to prominent senior scholars in innovation studies and learn from their experiences and their views in understanding the nature and impact of innovation. So as Rajesh said, today's session features Mark Dodgson, a prominent Australian scholar, and he will be interviewed by Andrew Davies. Mark's brief autobiography is available on the event's website. It's very fascinating to read Mark's diverse work early in the career and how his intellectual contributions extended from CNC machines to technology and innovation management. And then his time in industry, taking senior positions, and his global experiences and networks. I will leave it to Andrew to introduce Mark in detail later. So this session has two parts. In the first half, Andrew will introduce and interview Mark. Then we will have a 5-minute break. In the second half, we will have a panel commenting on Mark's work or asking questions from Mark. There will be opportunities for the audience to ask questions towards the end of the session. So please post your questions on the chat. So when the question time comes, we can call you to ask your questions directly from Mark. Now, let me introduce Andrew Davies. Andrew is R.M. Phillips Freeman Chair and Professor of Innovation Management at the Science Policy Research Unit, University of Sussex Business School. Previously, he was Chair of the Management of Projects at UCL. He's Adjunct Professor at BI Norwegian Business School, Visiting Professor at Lewis Rome, and Honorary Professor at Bartlett University College London. His research on project-based organizations and complex projects focuses on innovation, capabilities, and coordination. He has published in a range of management journals, such as Journal of Operations Management, Research Policy, Organizations Studies, California Management Review, MIT Sloan Management Review, Industrial and Corporate Change, International Journal of Project Management, and Project Management Journal. His book, Projects: A Very Short Introduction, was awarded the PMI 2018 David I. Cleland Literature Award for Contribution to Knowledge. He's a senior editor of the Project Management Journal, member of the Editorial Advisory Board for International Journal of Project Management, and associate editor of Industrial and Corporate Change. He's an honorary fellow of the Association for Project Management in 2021. Welcome, Andrew. Now I take the opportunity to briefly introduce the members of the panel. Ammon Salter is a professor of technology and innovation management at Warwick Business School. His research focuses on open and distributed models of innovation, R&D decision-making, social networks, and innovation, and university and industry collaborations. His research has been published widely, highly cited, receiving over 30,000 Google citations, and he has received numerous awards, including Strategic Management Journal 2021, Dan and Mary Lou Schendel Best Paper Prize. Welcome, Ammon. Tim Kastelle is Professor and Director, Andrew N. Livery's Academy for Innovation and Leadership in the Faculty of Engineering, Architecture and Information Technology in the University of Queensland. He graduated from Princeton University with a degree in economics, and his MBA and PhD were completed at UQ, the University of Queensland. Tim has published widely in the leading innovation journals. He's deeply committed to translating research into practice, and to this end, he writes a well-regarded innovation blog for managers. You can read it at timkastelle.org/blog. And he has worked extensively with a wide range of organizations. Welcome, Tim. Marina Zhang is an associate professor at the Australia-China Relations Institute, University of Technology, Sydney, UTS. Prior to this position, Marina worked for UNSW and Swinburne University in Australia and Tsinghua University in China. Marina has a bachelor's degree in biological science from Peking University, an MBA and a PhD from Australian National University, ANU. Marina has also published in leading innovation and management journals and co-authored 3 books. Welcome, Marina. So you can read about their detailed bios. They are available on the event's website. So without further ado, I invite Andrew to start the interview.
Thank you very much, Dilupa. That's a great introduction to it. When I was thinking about doing this, and I'm extremely honoured to do this, because I know Mark as an academic, and I've with incredible insights and a wonderful career, but also know him as a friend and a colleague as well. So I just wanted to say a few words, a little bit about that. I mean, because I realised, Mark, that I've known you nearly 40 years. I think it was 1985 and 1986 when we first met, but we didn't meet as academics. I was actually doing building work on your house with David Gann. and it was between university, and I eventually went and did a PhD in Sprue, and you just joined Sprue. So it was about 85 or 86 when you bought the house, which is not far from me now. So, you know, and one of the things that I found really intriguing about your biography is that when I look at it, and there were many things I didn't know, even though we've spoken at great length about your sort of, in a way, it's not a conventional route into academia at all. You weren't, in terms of, you lived in Wales and Uganda, and that inspired your interest in politics and global politics as well. But you weren't doing that well at school. You weren't the greatest scholar at school. You went to Middlesex Polytechnic, I think it was. You followed your girlfriend because she was doing what seemed like an interesting course at the time. And you sort of stumbled into academia. And then you talk about, and I think I really encourage people to look at it. You talk about the early days and when you were working as one of the things, you were a lorry driver, worked making sound equipment for bands like Pink Floyd. But it was then that you saw an advert for a PhD on the wall of the factory, and you realized that actually this might be an interesting thing to do. But then you thought, what should I study? And you'd seen that they were introducing computer numerically controlled tools in the factory. And you thought, well, that might be a good thing to do. So you went into the factory and asked them about that. And you looked into it. And in a way, qualitative work, a curiosity about how things work, seems to have driven your career all the way. And that led you into you got an interview at Imperial, and they were impressed by your knowledge of CNC tools, and that went on. You went on to do great things. So I won't dwell on it too much, but I really encourage people to have a look at it because it's sort of interesting, and it led you into Imperial, doing a PhD at Imperial, meeting Ron Dorr, and then eventually getting a job. Your first sort of big job after Imperial was at Sprue, and where you met Chris Freeman and Roy Rothwell and many other colleagues, and that became a sort of a platform for the rest of your career, resulting in a position in Australia at ANU, and then later Queensland. So please do look at it, everybody. But we'll get into the questions, and you can, I'm sure some of these things might come back as well. So just to kick it off, Mark, would you please tell us about some of your most formative experiences and their influences on your career and your life and career?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Andy, and thank you everyone else for attending, and the organisers and the commentators. It's very, very kind of you to do this. Very much looking forward to it. And it's a great question, and that's the theme of this series, I think, is trying to understand how people got into the career that they did. And it's difficult thinking about formative experiences when you're doing them. They're not formative, but on reflection, you think back, and I've been reflecting back on some good experiences and some testing bad experiences and the way that they shape my interests. And I guess I'll start with the bad experience, which was what happened in the country I grew up in Uganda. Uganda was a quite contented and relatively prosperous country, and very quickly became a nightmare of a country. I had a pretty idyllic life there, and then everything went wrong. And one of my distinctive memories was driving back late at night with my father from Kampala, the capital, to where we lived in Entebbe, and coming across a roadblock where a very drunken soldier put a gun to my head. And I distinctly remember the cold barrel against my forehead and his very bloodshot eyes, and remember thinking, how did this happen? Why is this happening? My father did a great job, and we disentangled ourselves from that. But that was just an illustration of a country that just went downhill so quickly, and because of, well, there's no other word for it, evil. The President Idi Amin was evil personified, and may have ended up killing half a billion, 500,000 people, and of course he threw out all the Asians and destroyed the economy and caused all sorts of awful things, including murdering 3 of my school friends. So that was a very formative experience, that things can turn bad very quickly, and there is evil in the world. And in contrast with that, a more positive note is, this is a pretty insane story, but when I was 17, I was sitting in a pub in London. I wasn't supposed to, I was underage, but I used to do it. with a friend, and we had a long holiday ahead of us. And my friend said, "What are you doing tomorrow?" I said, "Well, I don't have any plans for the next couple of months." And he said, "Let's hitchhike to Morocco." So in a fit of complete madness, I agreed. And the next day we were on the North Circular Road in London with our thumbs out, hitchhiking through Spain, France, Morocco. We went up and down, north and south, east and west in Morocco for several weeks. And we had some adventures. I nearly drowned. We were arrested and beaten up by police. But my abiding memory of that trip was the kindness, the generosity of all the people we met. We had no money. We didn't even have a tent. We had a couple of plastic bags that we slept in. It was insane. It was a stupid thing to do. But the legacy of that was just how kind people were, the way they took us in, the way they fed us, the way they looked after us. Shortly after we had our problems with the police, we were taken in by some Bedouin boys, young man, in their tent, and they were great. They just looked after us for days and fed us. And I just remember all these different countries, all the different people we met, and their abiding generosity and kindness. So those sort of things, the good and the bad, it sort of reflects in a smaller way in the whole area of innovation, and how innovation can be a very force for good, a very positive thing, and it can also be a very negative thing. I'm always reminded of the story of the engineer Thomas Midgley, who was instrumental in developing refrigeration, which of course absolutely transformed agriculture and the retail industry and the whole food chain. And he was also asked by Henry Ford to deal with the problem he had in Ford engines, which were knocking, and he solved that and helped build an automobile industry which employed millions around the world and democratized travel and so on. But of course, that was the positive. The negative was that he put CFCs in the fridge, which nearly destroyed the ozone level. And he put lead in petrol, which had similarly devastating environmental impacts. So there's the good and the bad in innovation. And ironically, poor old Midgley suffered from polio, and in order to be able to move in bed, he developed a system of ropes and pulleys to help him move, but it misperformed and strangled him to death. Yeah, so kind of ironic. So there's the good and the bad, and we see it today. We see it with social media. We've got technologies for good in health and education, and we've got technologies that produce weapons of mass destruction. We have drones that can deliver pharmaceuticals and food to stricken communities, but they can also drop bombs. We've got AI, and we still don't know what the impacts of AI is going to be. But you mentioned the PhD I did on computer numerical control machine tools, and that was very instrumental as well, because I studied how you put a computer on a machine tool for cutting metal, and it was used in all sorts of ways. It actually, in some cases, took jobs away. In some cases, it de-skilled the people using them. But in other cases, it increased employment, and this kind of innovation increased the skills of the people working it. And there was a choice. Managers had a choice in how it was used, and designers had a choice in how the technology was created. So that kind of led me into thinking about this wonderfully rich subject of innovation, where it can be good and it can be bad. And we have a way of being able to understand that and improve its use, accentuate the positive sides of it and ameliorate the negative. So a few words.
Great, that's fantastic. Thank you. So we'll move on to Sprue. Sprue is obviously a very important part of your career, Mark. Can you say a few words on what you learned during your time there?
Well, Sprue was absolutely essential for my research career. It was a marvelous place to work, and it's still going after all these years. It's a testament to the strength of its vision and its founders. The culture there, the research culture, was something that will live with me forever. It was totally interdisciplinary, totally open. And I remember in the last of this series, Ben Martin was talking about the culture there and the people sharing ideas. And that was very important. We used to meet as a group every morning and every afternoon having cups of tea and coffee and talk about ideas. Ideas are the key currency. Everyone was talking and sharing about them, and it was a great experience working there. And they were wonderful people. You know, it's a community of scholars. And to mention a few, I mean, Chris Freeman obviously is a huge factor, influence on my life. And he taught me a great deal. He taught me a great deal, for example, I mean, Chris was a magnificent public speaker, great orator, and obviously a brilliant man. But I was also struck by how much he prepared for every talk he gave. He took he didn't take people's attention for granted. He worked really hard at getting his presentations right. And he was also a very rounded person. You know, we used to go to test match cricket and spend a day together, and we'd talk about everything. You know, he had interests well beyond academia. And I could listen to him all day because of his experience as a wartime captain and tank commander. And, you know, he's just a fascinating man. I learned a lot from Roy Rothwell. Roy was really one of the true founders of the study of the management of technology and innovation. And what he taught me is research is no good if it sits on a shelf. It has to get out. It has to, no matter how you get it out, inform people, communicate it, whether it's in publications or radio or newspaper articles, just get it out there. And that was an important lesson from him. I learned a lot from Margaret Sharp. I shared an office with Margaret for a number of years, and she was very policy orientated, which is handy. She ended up in the House of Lords, but she always taught me to think about the policy implications of work. Jeff Oldham was the director, was a very good director of SPRU, always made us think about the international elements of what we do. And SPRU was always a very international place, which is very important. So lots of people, John Besson, John wasn't exactly at SPRU, but he was a member of the SPRU family. And John was always so enthusiastic about people and welcoming of people's ideas and generous in the time he gave people. So all these people learned. But there was a fantastic community of people, you know, young researchers from, you know, Giovanni Dossi and Luke Serter, and you know, there were people like Tim Brady and Kevin Morgan and Mike Hobday. It was just an endless list of people, Eric Arnold, people with great ideas who were sharing those ideas in a great community. So that's what I took away from SPRU. I was very fortunate.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you emphasised the importance of ideas, because too often people now will talk about where they've published, not what the ideas that go into that publication. Mm-hmm. And also the respect, and I think that was led by Chris Freeman, for people, whatever their position in the institute, they may have something important to say, and listening to people. So it's just reflecting on what you said.
Yeah, and you know, one of my proudest moments there was when Chris Freeman cited my work in one of his publications. You know, he didn't have to. It wasn't a particularly insightful or relevant piece that he cited, but it meant so much to me that this great man was citing a young academic, and it was the sort of thing he did, because it was really encouraging. I was thinking, you know, okay, maybe my work has got some interest. It probably didn't, but Chris just did it as an act of generosity. But that indicates the sort of thing that those people in those positions can do, and people like Chris do it quite often.
Great, thank you. So I'm struck by the extent of your collaboration in your career. How has collaboration featured in what you've done?
Hugely. It's been the great pleasure of my academic career is the number of people I've worked with. I think I've published with over 60 people, and it's been great. I'm doing a project at the moment looking at fusion power in the UK, and talking to a lot of scientists who run a scientific experiment called the Joint European Torus for 40 years. It's one of the great scientific experiments of all time. And you talk to them, all these scientists who come from all around the world to work on this machine, about the greatest lesson, the greatest thing they've taken away from working on this machine over the decades. And it's not the science, it's the friendships they've made and the collaborations they've had with other people and what they've learned from other people that's so important. And so the research collaborations I've had have been hugely, hugely important, because I just love the people I work with, and it's been a great pleasure. Not always easy, but always rewarding. And they have my research collaborations have sort of been very different. Some of them have extended over many years. You know, you said we've worked together for many years, and my colleague David and I have worked, but we've published together for 35 years, so it's quite a long time, and we've developed quite a modus operandi of working together over that period. Other people I've worked with more intensively for a short period. So Ammon Salter, for example, we worked together quite intensively for a number of years, wrote a couple of books, a few articles, and that was really great. But it's not only collaborations in research that have been important to me. I spent 10 years at the Australian National University helping build a management school, and I did it in partnership with Bruce Denning, and it was a horrible, tough political job. The institution was difficult, and had we not collaborated, had we not had each other's backs and supported one another, we would never have got anywhere. And that was crucially important to us. We wouldn't have survived if it had been alone. And the way that we complemented each other and supported each other is hugely important to both of us. And in the policy side, I mean, one of the people I had probably more work to do on the policy side than anyone else is a man called Terry Cutler. And Terry and I had been talking for years about Australia's innovation system and the fact that it wasn't really much of a system. And with others, including people like Narelle Kennedy, we got together and created what we call the Coalition of the Willing to start getting a debate about Australia's national innovation system together. And we had various events around the country and just built up some momentum and interest. And that led to a government inquiry into Australia's national innovation system that Terry was the chair and I was the head of research for it. And we produced a report, and it got caught up in a lot of the politics at the time. And it had an impact. It was part of the movement in Australia, a more understanding towards a more systematic approach to innovation in the country. But Terry and I, again, had each other's backs. We had some complementary skills, and we consoled each other about having the misery of having to spend so much time talking to politicians and to policymakers who are pretty boneheaded. So those kind of collaborations are also very important as well. They bring complementarity, they bring support and encouragement when you need it. So absolutely essential.
Great, thank you very much. You've published on a wide range of subjects, but a couple of themes stick out: learning and play. Could you say a few words about these, please, Mark? Sure.
Well, I guess my interest in learning started when I was when I did my study of a biotechnology company called Celtech. And Celtech at the time was one of the world's first biotechnology companies, and by far Britain's most important biotechnology company, which was then quite a young phenomenon. And the CEO asked me to visit and asked me to write the history. The company was then 500 employees, about 10 years old. And I remember walking into his office to meet him for the first time. He had his feet up on the desk, and he was reading a book by Jürgen Habermas, which is quite a struggle. And I thought, oh, what's the CEO doing reading this stuff? And I got to know him, and it was one of the first lessons of how many really, really smart people work in business, and much larger than many people in academia in many cases. But his name was Jared Fettler, and he was really interested in learning organizations, and he wrote a couple of books about how organizations learn. And it was just such a fascinating experience meeting these people. The chairman of the company was a man called John Jackson, and he was what I thought was a typical City of London chairman of a company, finance background. But once you got to know John, he was a Buddhist. He owned several organic farms at a time when organic farm wasn't very trendy. He was an expert on Amazonian butterflies. He just had this diversity of experience. And what they were doing with Celtech, they were trying to create something new, something really different. And when we talk about learning, you learn by doing things every day. You learn by doing, and you learn to do new things. So things like R&D teach you to do new things. But what companies like Celtech were doing was they were reflecting on how they learn. They were learning to learn. They were thinking about how to learn in this new technology in a new business environment. And that sort of intrigued me. And I was kind of interested in how large organizations learn and how they forget to learn. Because the world's a very rapidly changing place. There's huge amounts of uncertainty. Technology is changing, markets changing, demographics changing, everything's changing. And so there's the only thing that's certain is uncertainty. And learning is a crucial way of being able to adapt and survive, let alone thrive in such a volatile and uncertain world. So how organizations reflect on their learning and deal with their learning, improve their learning, is a crucial way of ensuring their survival. And the notion of play, well, that sort of started when I was working with Ammon and David Gannon and Jenny White and various others on the notions of play, Catherine Koopman as well. And we were, at the time, we were kind of talking with Shell quite a bit, and Shell in the Netherlands had this kind of playroom where they had invited people to come in and do creative things, and that kind of got us thinking about play. And Ammon and David and I wrote a book called Think, Play, Do, where play is the connection between the thinking part of innovation and the doing part of innovation. And play is where you test and prototype and tinker and try new things. And we saw that, but we also saw that play was a crucial part of having fun in an organization. Working in rapidly changing environments is very stressful, and you need to have some kinds of antidotes to that. And play was not only a stimulus to creativity, but it was also gave you the enthusiasm. If you're going to work every day to do the same thing, it's pretty mundane and soul destroying. But if you're going in to try something new, to play with something new, a new piece of equipment to play with, or a new idea to explore, you ought to work with a bit of a spring in your step, and a smile on your face. And so we were thinking about play as that intermediary between thinking and doing, and as a means of improving creativity and enjoyment and staff retention and all those things. That became a key issue. And then we went on to think about the playful entrepreneur and how many of the entrepreneurs that we've studied over the years have got this sort of playful, experimental, discovery-focused orientation. And they also want to have some joy and pleasure in their life, I think sometimes as academics, we don't have as much fun as we should. We're too burdened by all the expectations put upon us, but we have got an opportunity as academics to have the time to reflect and to learn and to play, and we should make more of that.
Yeah, and it sounds like the early times in Sprue in particular did provide room for play and time and thinking and fun as well.
Absolutely. I mean, when we wrote Think, Play, Do, we were trying the ideas out, and one of the things that Roy Rothwell taught me is this notion of tough customers, good designs. If you've got an idea, test it out in the toughest audience you possibly can. So we took it to two of the hardest nosed business people we knew. One was Ray O'Rourke, owner of Lang O'Rourke, the big construction company, and the other was Richard Sykes, who was previously been CEO and chairman of GlaxoSmithKline. And these are hard-ass people, businessmen. And we sort of went in with some trepidation saying, you need to play more. And they got it straight away. They absolutely got it straight away. They said, yeah, that's exactly right. We used to have a playful organization when we were smaller or when we started up, but we've lost that capacity to play. We've lost that capacity to try new ideas, not be frightened of failure, to experiment, to explore, and to have fun.
Great, thank you. Next question. I think you're currently producing your 20th book. Can you say something about the importance of books, please, Mark?
Well, there's different kinds of books. There's books for teaching courses, and there's books for ideas. And I think I really didn't like a lot of the things that were happening in academia when there was more and more focus on producing just academic journal articles. I think that was a big mistake. First and foremost, you can't get every idea down in 12,000 words. Books have given you the option to explore ideas and broad range of ideas. So books are crucially important. But that's not to denigrate other sources. I mean, it's important to get, as Roy Rothwell taught me, get the work out there, whether it's a radio program or a newspaper article, and you can go down different routes. Ammon has produced a whole string of marvelous first-rate academic journal articles, and he's an absolute publication superstar in that regard. Tim Kastelle produces this wonderful blog, which has informed lots of people and changed a lot of ideas and behaviours in firms. Marina's done all these things, and she's a regular appearance on Bloomberg TV, and so there's different ways of getting your work out there. But just books to me are a very good way of being able to get a broader idea out, and a very good way of telling stories. Stories are what we remember. Stories are hugely important. The most important lesson I learned about stories was when my brother Philip Pullman is one of the world's great storytellers, and one of his books was put on as a play in the National Theatre in London. So I went with him to that play, and it was in the main theatre, 1,000 people, and the play was 6 hours long, 2 3-hour sessions. And throughout the 6 hours, there were a lot of children in the audience. There was no noise. You could hear a pin drop. You couldn't hear a sweet paper rattle or anything like that, because people were intent on the story. They were locked into the story. What's happening? Why is it happening? How's it happening? What's going to happen next? What's it all mean? You're just engrossed in the story. And never aspire to be a greater storyteller as him. But if you can tell a story, people want to know. They want to continue to read. They want to know what happened, and they want to think about its implications, and they remember it. So books that tell stories and the other ways of communicating are important.
Just a supplementary question on that. Many early career researchers, particularly say PhD students, there's a lot of emphasis on methods, and that's important, and understanding theory and engaging with theoretical conversations. But sometimes I feel that there's a neglect for the skill of writing. Is that how important is it to be able to write clearly? Should it be part of the next generation skill set? Can it be taught?
Yeah. My basic line is that research, actually going out and asking questions, doing experiments or whatever it is you do, is the best bit.
Yeah.
The writing is the really, really hard bit, and the publication is just ghastly, horrible process. But the writing is hard, and learning to write for different audiences is important. And if you are writing a journal article, you do need to go through the process. And that's not to say you shouldn't be sympathetic to the reader and try and make it a bit more accessible. But if you're writing a book, you've got more freedom. If you do, I've done a lot of radio, lots and lots of radio. I'm told I have a great face for radio, so that's why I've stuck with that medium. And you have to learn about what the listener might want to hear, and so you keep on throwing in little anecdotes or little stories that they want to know the end of, and don't switch off and go and make a cup of tea. Or if you're writing for a newspaper, very short sentences and it's snappy and so on. So you learn these techniques, but they are learned, and they do need to be learned. You can't have the one style for all these different means of communication. But it's not easy, and it's something that you continue to do. But the major principle in all of these is put yourself in the listener or the reader's mind. Make it interesting. Be sympathetic to them. Avoid your jargon, because that just is exclusionary. Just have sympathy for the reader. What would be interesting for them? What do they need to know, and why is it important? I mean, those are the key things.
Great, yeah, and I've known quite a few people who've written with you, including me, and I think your role as a mentor in that process has been very powerful, helping people, and they've learned tricks from you and learned a lot from you. So, many people have said that to me. So moving on, you've had quite a bit of experience in business. Can you reflect on some of the lessons you learned and implications for academia, please, Mark?
Yeah, well, first of all, very, very smart people work in business, and it's great to work with them and learn from them. They've got much to teach us, and so I've enjoyed all my times talking to people in business. I think reflecting on this, and what an issue that arises is the nature of responsibility. I was on the board of Nestle, big food company in Australia, and I had personal liability insurance of £500 million, half a billion dollars. And that sort of think, whoa, why am I insured for so much? Well, Nestle sells 1 billion products a day, and you're not allowed to poison anyone. So you are responsible for selling a lot of products that people are going to eat and use, and there's dangers associated with them. So you, as a board member, have responsibility to ensure that safety is and quality is central in what you do. I was also on the board of a large construction and mining company where, unfortunately, one of the workers died in a work site in central Borneo. And we went up there and we went through the circumstances that led to his unfortunate death. And that sort of brought home to me the responsibility, that you've got huge responsibilities as a director of a board. You've got the responsibility to shareholders, to stakeholders, including your customers. In the case of Nestle, you mustn't poison them. And in the case of your staff, you've got to make sure they get home safely every day. And so there are significant responsibilities. And you might say that academics don't have those kinds of responsibilities. But academics do have a lot of responsibility. I mean, we have responsibility to our students. We have to ensure that they have a good learning experience and go away more knowledgeable, more receptive to learning than when they arrived. We have responsibility to our discipline, and that means that we have to do our reviewing, and we have to do the things that perhaps we don't enjoy quite so much, but we have a responsibility to try and build knowledge in our field. We've got responsibility to research funders. We're given money that doesn't go to other people in order to be able to do the projects that we want to do. And that responsibility means that we've got to deliver. We've got to say we're going to deliver something. It might not be exactly what we say we're going to deliver, but we've got to work on delivering. And we have, to some extent, we have a responsibility to our employer. That's a reciprocal arrangement. Our employer has to show responsibility towards us, but responsibility to the employer means that we have to promote the organization that we're a part of and that's paying us. So we have different kinds of responsibilities. But one of the things that does perturb me a little bit in some of the social sciences is that we aren't as disciplined as we might be when it comes to things like deadlines. When we say we're going to do something, we really have to do it. If you continue not to do things in business, you're sacked. It's less easy to get rid of people in academia. But if you commit to providing a review by a certain date, or commit to a chapter or an article or a Zoom call, whatever it is, if you say you're going to do it, do it. Don't prevaricate. And I think that is probably another lesson to take away from business. It's gross inefficient and rude not to be able to stick to those deadlines.
And it's just a supplementary question on this. It's sort of really interesting hearing you speak about working closely with business and industry and collaborating with them, perhaps offering strategic advice, consulting, things like that. And many of us have done this. But there's also sometimes a danger of retaining your independence, your critical approach. How do you balance that? What sort of advice would you give for trying to achieve that?
Yeah, well, my baseline is that in this area of innovation, whether you're working on the economics of innovation or the geography of innovation, or if you're working on innovation policy, you really do have to understand how decisions are made
Mm.
by firms. You really have to understand how boards, how executive teams, how general managers, how R&D managers, innovation manager, whoever it is, how they make decisions, because you want to understand it and you want to change and influence it. And that means really engaging with those people, understanding those people, but also being able to step back and take a critical look at that. Not necessarily critical in terms of their actual performance, but critical in terms of what does it mean? Are they making decisions which accord with our understanding of the literature? And are they making decisions according with what we consider, based on our experience and reading, of what constitutes a good decision? So we need to calibrate that constantly. And if we're teaching or researching, there's nothing more dull than the war story. The story of what happened without any context, without any explanation around it. You know, the great entrepreneur comes in, I did this, I did that, you know, I made this money. You know, that's not interesting. I mean, what's interesting is why those decisions were made and what circumstances led to those conditions and that made those decisions being made. And that involves understanding that context, and that involves your reading, your understanding of the world, your understanding of how organizations work, how local government works, or whatever it is. And that requires your academic grounding. So you need to do both, and your empirical work, if you're working and talking to people at work, that needs to constantly question and feed into your base understanding that comes from reading and research in other areas. So it's a constant iteration. But one thing, if I may have a little rant here, one thing that does disturb me is the number of people who profess to teach or advise on innovation policy without having spent any time in a firm. The great economist Alfred Marshall, who instrumental in understanding about regional clusters of innovation, visited a different factory every week in order to be able to calibrate his theoretical understanding of how economies work with the decision-making processes in firms. So that to me is a crucial connection.
Yeah, and just one follow-up question on that. You know, we often talk about impact, and we're measured on impact. Going back to the early days in SPRU, much of the work and terms like engaged scholarship are used to talk about how we should engage with policy or business and so on. But you know, the important thing is to sort of be involved in some ways. How important do you think it is to sort of actually shape outcomes, to shape the world, rather than sit back and observe, but for academics to be involved in making things happen?
Well, you can try. I mean, you should try, but the capacity to be able to change the world is kind of limited. I mean, it's quite surprising to me. You know, some of the impact I've had in firms have been unexpected. So, you know, in one board discussion, we were talking about something, and I suddenly started talking about David Tease's theory of complementary assets, you know, and it suddenly resonated, and the conversation turned around to the need to think about complementary assets around the innovation. And so that had an impact on that company at that time. And I mentioned the Cutler Review and the work we did on that. And again, immediate impact, maybe a little bit more money put into innovation and maybe a few little changes, but not a huge amount. But it was part of the conversation that moved the whole debate on. And so that was valuable in that way. So I can't predict when academic research is going to be influential, but it can be. And I remember many years ago when Jeff Oldham at SPRU went up to the Department of Trade and Industry, as it then was in the UK, to talk about the future of SPRU. And it said, can you give us some examples of the way that the research at the Science Policy Research Unit has changed policy towards science, technology and innovation in the UK? And they said, no, we can't think of any. So Jeff, oh no, well, he said, well, there's no point to sprue. I'll go and close it down. And they said, no, you're essential. You're really important to us. And we said, well, we don't influence directly policy. No. You influence the environment that you're thinking. You provide all these insights. There's data there when we need it. It's essential that you do these things. So that was a kind of an important insight. But you've got to be there. You've got to participate. You might not be able to predict if you're going to have any impact at all, but you need to be there in order, just in case you can.
And just one final question. In your biography, you refer to the importance of luck in your career. Would you care to expand on it, please, Mark?
I'm very fortunate, very lucky career. If you think of all the ingredients that make a successful, if you can call it successful academic career, you need a number of things. Firstly, you need to work hard. There's no getting away from the fact that there are occasions where you put in long hours and you make sacrifices. You don't attend the children's school play and you're working very long hours to finish things. There's no doubt about that. Hard work is an element of any successful academic career. You need some brains. You need to be able to assimilate complex ideas and process them and hopefully rearrange them or add to them and communicate them. And that requires a certain motor power. Not the most important element of an academic by any means, but it's necessary. I think you need curiosity. You need to be curious about the world, and the Chris Freemans of the world constantly curious. They want to know. The Ron Dawes, who I worked with for many years, a great scholar, always asking questions. Dick Nelson and I did a research trip around South Korea, and we were going to lots of factories, shipbuilding, car factories, all sorts of, and he was just intent. He was asking questions all the time, trying to get to the answers and asking really astute, clever questions. And that curiosity is an essential element to a successful academic. So those are some of the, you need persistence, hard work, curiosity, a certain amount of brain power. But luck is probably the most influential one. If I hadn't seen that advert in my boring factory for PhD students, had I not known that the next door factory had introduced a CNC machine, had I not met Ron Daw on my very first day at Imperial College, had Jane Marceau not become a friend in Australia and moved me to Australia, had I not had the good fortune of meeting people like Bruce Denning and Terry Cutler and Narelle Kennedy and all these people who've had a big influence on my life. That is such an important element. But there's two things about luck that I've always remembered. The first, of course, is Pasteur's dictum that fortune favors the prepared mind. And the notion of serendipity, you might not find what you're looking for, but you'll find something because you're looking. And so having an open mind is really, really important. And the second thing about luck was that classic case where the golfer, Gary Player, was playing a round of golf and he putted a ball from a long distance and it went in a hole, and someone from the crowd said, well, that was lucky, Gary. And he said, yeah, it's funny, isn't it? The more I practice, the luckier I get. So that notion of being open and prepared and receptive to luck and keep on going, just keep on going. We all, as academics, constantly get knockbacks. We get rejections from journals. I got one rejection the other day. You get them all the time, and it's part and parcel. Sometimes you might get bad teaching reviews. You may get a bad staff review. You may set out to do an experiment that doesn't work. You may work with someone that you fall out with. All these setbacks are constant and unavoidable. But dusting yourself down, persevering, keep on going, those are the keys.
And it sounds to me, you just keep going, hitting deadlines, getting over setbacks. Sounds like resilience is an important part of.
Yeah. when we did our book on the playful entrepreneur, we talked about some of the behaviors of successful entrepreneurs. And fortitude is one of the key ones, which is consistently taking the knocks, dusting yourself down and getting back up. There will be knocks, and some of them will be very, very difficult. There'll be highly public failures, and you have to deal with that. You have to move on. Just on the other characteristics, another element is ambition. You got to want to know where you want to get to, and that ambition, not necessarily financial or idea of getting promotions in your institution, but ambition, for example, in being able to answer a question that's puzzled you, an intellectual question that I really want to know the answer to that, and the ambition that drives you to try and understand that. Another element, which I guess again demonstrated to great effect by Chris Freeman, is that of grace, which is to understand you can't do everything by yourself, and you're dependent on other people. And coming back to the question of collaboration, the other people provide things that you don't have, knowledge or experiences or just ways of working, all these different things. The lone solitary academic is a bit of a myth. We all rely on others, and the ability to be able to, the grace to understand that you are not the greatest mind in the world, your research is not the greatest in the world, but if you work with others, it's better. Your work is better. And the final element of what we call the playful entrepreneur is, again, I think it comes back to something you were talking about, is craft, and how an academic craft is developed, how you improve your skills in the classroom so that you can maximize the learning of a diverse group, and you can deal with the difficult people, and you can deal with a group with differential abilities and differential experiences. And you can craft a career as a researcher, learning your skills, learning how to write proposals, learning how to do the research, learning how to write it up and communicate it, and crafting a career, deciding when to stay in your institution, when to move, making career-long decisions. So these are all elements of what we call a playful entrepreneur, and comply pretty straightforwardly to an academic career too.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a time to pause for 5 minutes. We will come back. Thank you so much, Mark. That was really, really interesting. I really enjoyed it. We're going to carry on, but we're going to introduce the panel after the break in 5 minutes. And I've already seen some interesting questions which will be collected, and we can ask some of those at the end.
Very good.
Thanks. So see everybody in about 5 minutes.
Dilupa, can you make this announcement? Can you see the screen share?
Yes, sure,
Yeah.
Rajesh.
Yeah.
All right, so let's use this opportunity to share a quick announcement. So we are going to have the next event of the In Conversation series on the 23rd of April 2024 at 9 o'clock in the morning of London time. So that session will feature Ben Martin, and he will be interviewed by Sandro Mendonca. The panel will be Diana Hicks, Paul Nightingale, and Jeremy Hall. The session will be moderated by Abiodun Egbe-Tokun. So while we are having the break, I also want to remind you that and invite you to post your questions, continue to post your questions in the chat. Thank you.
Mm.
Turned on, so they'll ring tonight. I'm thinking that tonight, and that's what I meant. Oh, it's not really, really too.
Don't get me too.
No, I was very good. No, absolutely, I was there.
Yeah, it's great.
Anyway,
It's great. Yeah. Is it going all right? Thank you. Shall we start again?
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah. I'm just checking this. Have we got Ammon with us?
Here he is.
Yeah.
Hi, Ammon.
Yes, yes.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Ammon. Just seen you. So good to see you. Okay. So, everybody ready to go? Good. Okay. So we're moving now on to the panel session. And Mark and I are really happy to have three wonderful discussants, Ammon, Tim, and Marina. And each of you have, as Mark was saying earlier, have contributed to the field of innovation studies in a multiple different ways, and we're kind of delighted to have you here to sort of reflect that diversity of input, both in terms of your collaborations with Mark and your own contributions as well, which have been, I know, have been really tremendous. So I'd like to ask you some thoughts about what Mark has said sort of so far, and maybe think about three questions, but you don't have to follow them. It's just for kind of inspiration. What are the most important questions do you think we have in the field of innovation studies? I mean, you can reflect on Mark's talk as well. Please do that. But what are the most important questions in the field of innovation studies? What are you currently studying? And what advice would you give to early career researchers in the field? And we'll just run through each of you giving your thoughts, your reflections, and then I might just ask, after each one of you's finished, I'll ask Mark just to maybe reflect, and we can have a little small interaction. But we just got to watch time, that's all. Okay. So, Ammon, we'll start with you, if that's okay.
Sure. Thank you, Andy. It's great to be here with everyone and to celebrate a little bit of Mark's work. As someone who benefited from Mark in my career, it's a great opportunity to say thank you. I was a young researcher when I first met Mark at Imperial College, just transferred over from Sussex University and left Spru, which is like my home ground, as a doctoral student, and was adjusting to Imperial. And then Mark had me join with him in the update of his textbook, which was a great project. I spent some time in Australia, and Mark was a great host there, and Tim and John Steen and other colleagues from UQ. So that was a great experience for me. So, these are, early on in your career, if you have a few useful mentors like David and Ben and Andy and Tim and all these other people have been very helpful for me over the career. It's been incredibly useful. You think of an academic career as like a long passage where you got to get lifted up many times by many different mentors and colleagues as you go through the process. And so you feel like you have a legacy to the next generation to do the same thing for those behind you, younger scholars who are trying to get ahead and make their way in this career. So, I think there's something particular about the innovation studies field, which differs from other fields, even closely related fields, is that the fathers and mothers of the field were very generous people. They had a lot of sympathy for new ideas, new entrants. They always had time for people. I mean, and that's extraordinary. And they got along together. They didn't have, even though they disagreed about ideas, they were not in conflict with each other. And I think this cultural character did pass on to the next generation. If you look at like the field like entrepreneurship, where's a little less of this legacy and goodwill among scholars, then you have more contests and less sense of collective purpose than you find in innovation studies. So I think there is this cultural practice, which was born in many different institutions, certainly at Spru, that did carry on. So I think that's an important feature of our community, and hopefully we can keep that going. So for me, the first question is, how do we, so I think about someone like myself. I arrived at Spru kind of at the end of the great period, if you will. So it was like in the middle 1990s. There were still lots of great people there, but it was after the sort of the canonical Spru papers were published in the 1980s. And the issue is, so that I had exposure to the greatest generation of innovation scholars: Dick Nelson, Sid Winter, Nathan Rosenberg. All these people came to town, and, you were able to interact with them. And many of them, we've seen in the last few years, like some of our leading scholars like Paul David have passed away. Dick is now in his 90s. Sid is having it difficult to travel, so a lot of scholars are not going to have this face-to-face interaction with this generation. And the question is, how do we sustain memory? Is there something particular? Is there something about the written work which is not the same as meeting the people who wrote it? And so the question is, how do we create some kind of repository, something which would be attractive to the next generation to observe. Because the problem is the written text is not going to get much attention because people focus on the latest and greatest research in the journals. So how do we get, eyeballs and interest from younger scholars to the ideas? So we can do this through our PhD programs and reading classes, make them read these works, but also, what can we do? What else can we do to kind of give more, substance to people's understanding of this issue and to fully acknowledge the contributions of the greatest generation of innovation scholars? So that's my first question.
Good one. Thank you. Thanks, Ammon. Mark, do you want to sort of any reflections, thoughts?
Well, first of all, thank you, Ammon. I think you are the personification of the next generation of great innovation scholars. I mean, you are there, and I've observed the way that you not only contribute by publishing your ideas, but you share them, and your encouragement of PhD students and young faculty is exemplary, and you do a fantastic job. And if you want to know how to look at building the next generation of scholars with the right values, then look at Ammon Salter, I would advise. On the question of maintaining that memory, it is crucially important. And this series, by paying homage to Chris Freeman, is an example of the sort of thing that can be done in remembering his work and what he contributed. And what I particularly like about this series is it's not especially focused on the content of the work, but it's focused on why and how you did that work. What are the personal decisions? What are the personal circumstances that led you into this field? And I think that's important because, as you said, Ammon, the purpose, the shared purpose at Sprue of trying to understand work, trying to understand why technology can be used for good or bad, that innovation can be used for good or bad, really a common shared purpose. And that is being revitalized with the climate crisis and the need to bring sustainability into everything, for example. And there is that common purpose. But we need to get back to, and I noticed that Ben Martin has put a question about this, about how you get the culture right. And Tim Brady's also asking about the question, because we were all beneficiaries from that culture. And the term you used is sharing. I remember Ove Granstrand, a great researcher from Sweden, came to visit us once, and after a couple of weeks, he gave a seminar, and he said, Sprue is a rich and generous place. And that generosity and sharing ideas was crucial. We every morning at 10, we have a cup of tea together, and every afternoon at 3 o'clock, we'd have a coffee together. And more often than not, we'd go to the bar in the evening, and it's a rich and generous place. And we need, admittedly, the incentives for academics were different in those days. You weren't on the treadmill of having to produce the papers, and teaching loads were not great if you did have one. But still, that generosity of spirit, that capacity to share, that curiosity about everything. And again, I think that was Tim Brady mentioned in the questions. The seminars you'd go to, there were two major seminar series each week. One on a Wednesday, which was a work in progress, which was someone talking about one of their projects, and then a Friday seminar where we got an eminent speaker from outside to come and talk. And given the diversity of issues in Sprue, it could be on any subject, it could be a very broad-ranging subject, but everyone used to go. It wasn't your area. You were curious to know about energy policy, or you were curious to know about policy decision making in an African nation. It was that broad-based curiosity and generosity. But in the short term, how do we do it? We need more Ammon Salters.
Thanks, Mike. Do you want any quick comments, Ammon?
Yeah, just a thought about this. I mean, I was visiting another university this week, and I met a young colleague, and she had her paper rejected at research policy. This is the first time I'd met her. She was a young researcher. And, we spent our full 40 minutes together with her lamenting the rejection process. And, she had at no time that she actually tried to engage me in what her research program was. And so, we spent all the time on the instrumentality of, rejections and writing papers and which journals to send it to. So it was completely, a conversation she could have had with a machine, really. I don't think she gained much from my interaction. So my issue is like, how do we get the young researchers to look up and play? They're under a lot of pressure. It's a much more competitive environment than we faced as researchers. And, the expectations in terms of research are quite high. And, when we came up through the system, you didn't have to be great to be good. Now you need to be great just to get a foothold in the academic career system. So I'm sensitive to the problems they face, but I don't know how do we give them space for play in an environment which is so competitive and so driven in terms of myopia towards small research topics, carving out a little area, we're doing a regression on a well-established topic, doing another paper on exploitation, ambidexterity or something like that, which is a well-trodden area. So how do we, in SPRU, people are doing these books, people had many different types of projects, some people are going to the policy space, some people are heading into an academic career. There was a lot of diversity in the PhD cohort and diversity in terms of research at the Institute. But, in the business school environment, everybody's locked down, focused on, how they can publish as quickly as possible, publish the best output they can from their research efforts. So how do we, it's like rowing against the river, you're never going to win against the Mississippi, eventually the Mississippi is going to pull you down. So how do we go about trying to shift this? I'm interested in your perspective on that.
Well, obviously it comes down to the key performance indicators that are thrust on universities by the government, and the key performance indicators the vice chancellor thrust on the deans, and the key performance indicators the deans thrust on the staff. And there does need to be greater relaxation in terms of the kinds of measurements that are used of universities and of academic performance. But we need to turn to reality. We need to turn to what actually matters, and what matters is how decisions are made in firms. And that's not. There are issues there, intellectual issues, which are broader than the kind of research questions that people are being forced into. The big questions about how does industry adapt to climate change? How do organizations learn to be able to respond to rapid technological change? The great management thinkers don't preoccupy themselves with myopia. Peter Drucker said, if you want to learn about business, you want to learn about management, read Tolstoy. And the examples I used, the CEO of Celtec sitting there reading Jürgen Habermas, the great managers are broad-based and not myopic. They have strategic vision. They try and understand the world and how their organization fits into the world. So that's the reality. And we need to emphasize that's the reality, that they're trying to create creative learning organizations where there's space for people to experiment and fail. And if they're doing it, we need to study it and relate it to our own organizations and say, this is the way of the world. And we need to think more about how we create resilient universities and resilient university departments. And that is not going down the limited key performance indicator, myopic research topic way of proceeding.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Ammon. That was for raising such pertinent and important questions and challenging questions for the whole research world. We'll now move on to Tim, and if you could offer us your reflections and thoughts on some of the questions, on what Mark's been talking about and the questions I asked.
Yeah. So first, thanks for having me. It's great to actually be involved with this and to reflect on all of the wonderful work that you've done over the years, Mark. I guess a couple of things that struck me in all of this, which might parallel a little bit some of the things that Ammon brought up. But I think, talking about the big research questions in innovation, and the most important ones right now, one of the things that I reflect on is that, Mark, you've looked at examples going back to Josiah Wedgwood, and gone back in history to look at how people operated, and then have gone all the way out to the cutting edge, with fusion and other topics. And I think when we have those hot topics today, there tends to be a lot of noise around AI, right? And a whole set of other things. But it seems to me that if we look at those examples from your work, there are actually enduring underlying questions about innovation. And you touched on a couple, like decision-making in firms, but it seems to me that there's probably others that continue to be important, right? And that if we need, if we're trying to understand what's going on with AI, it's probably helpful to actually go back to figure out, well, what problems was Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace grappling with, and maybe there's lessons that we can take from that. So how do we, so I guess one observation is that I think that's probably one way to think about where those questions are, and how we can do that. Andy asked what we're working on, and the thing that I'm really focused on right now also relates to something that you were just talking about. And so that is that I ran across this quote on Twitter, of all places, that said, "A conversation is the smallest unit of change." I can't find the original source of that quote. Strangely, ChatGPT gives an incorrect answer. But so I continue to search for it. But like as a quote, it has really struck with me and stuck with me. And I'm really curious about, well, how do conversations change an overall dialogue and a story? And you talked about conversation a lot, actually, in that history. You talked about talking with Chris Freeman at cricket games, and you talked about many conversations that you've had with other researchers. I think the fact that you're such a beautiful writer and storyteller contributes to conversations almost at scale as well through words. And so I'm that's the thing that I'm starting to investigate is at a firm level, at an organizational level, how do we take advantage of that? Because you talked about changing the world, and my hypothesis is that we actually do change the world cumulatively, right, through a whole series of conversations. So that's the second bit that I've reflected on. And then the third bit, advice for aspiring early career researchers. One is that, as Ammon alluded to, the academic world is quite different now than it was when we started. So if I had to just give flat out one piece of advice, it's be really cautious when people with gray hair or limited hair tell you, well, back when I started, I did this, right? Because there's some real danger, I think, in that, because things have changed a lot, and sometimes we're on top of that, sometimes we're not. So the related question that follows from that is that, when I started at University of Queensland, in large part thanks to your help, Mark, we were at a point in time, Andy mentioned your books. As a KPI in 2007, when I started at the UQ Business School, people that were writing books were being persecuted, like actively punished for writing books, because that wasn't what the cascading KPIs were rewarding. And yet you persisted with them because that's where you saw value. And I think a lot of the people from Sprue, Maureen McKelvey, Carlotta Perez, Chris, you and Marina, books have been a consistent theme through all of that, even though many of those people are working in situations where that's not rewarded. And so I guess the question I would pose to you from that is, when you're starting out, how do you keep that focus on doing good work and having impact, not just on having a focus on impact factors?
That's great, Tim. So Mark, I love the idea of conversation at scale. Mark, over to
Yeah,
you.
well, as usual, Tim raises all sorts of ideas, and over the years, the conversations with Tim have been essentially what's kept me sane, and a fellow traveller and someone who we can talk about serious ideas with has been essential to me. But starting with your question about learning from the past, I mean, the value of the past is we know what happened, right? And we can learn all sorts of lessons, contemporary lessons from the past. So look at infrastructure. Look at the way the Victorians built railways and sewer systems and so forth, and the way that it was funded and the way that the projects were structured and all these sort of things. And vast lessons for infrastructure investment today that we constantly seem to forget. Let's look at the success of entrepreneurs in the past and the values and the purpose that was driving them, and the fact that you know, you can be a successful entrepreneur and a decent person. You know, you don't need to be Elon Musk. So there are all sorts of things that contribute. And I mean, when going back to Sprue, it was the technological, the semiconductors were coming on board and computers were coming on board, and it was all ICT, information and communications technology, and everyone predicted much the same now, as AI is going to change the world. We're all doomed. We're all going to be out of jobs. We're all going to be de-skilled. And we don't. What the past has shown us is that we do have decisions that can influence the direction. We're not slaves to technology. Provided we've got people in the right positions, making policy makers, regulators, leaders of industry. If we've got, and users, if we've got the right people there making broader decisions, the history of the past shows, you know, that we model through. We can model through, and the microelectronics revolution, yeah, it changed the world, and it wasn't all bad. The AI revolution may change the world, and I don't think it will be all bad. You know, we can take lessons from the past. On the question of conversations, yeah, hugely important. But the problem with so many academics is that we want to only have conversations with people like us. You know, we want to talk about subjects that we're comfortable about, know about, with other people who think the same way as we do. And we need to have conversations with people in different disciplines who think differently. You know, the great thing about Sprue, going back to Sprue, you know, you'd have a conversation with a historian or a physicist or an engineer, a philosopher, you know, and it's those kind of conversations are really, really important. I'm very fortunate at the moment to be associated with Magdalen College at Oxford. I go to dinner there, and you have no idea who you're going to have dinner with, and it's fantastic. You know, you can talk to someone who's a medical person or someone who's a historian of Shakespeare. You just never know. And the beauty of the college system in Oxbridge is that they bring in people from all those disciplines and provide a means of having those conversations. Academics need to get out of the office. They need to go and talk like Marshall did, to talk to firms. They need to go and talk to people in government, policymakers, and talk about how they make decisions. So it's having a breadth of conversation as well as the depth of conversation in your particular field. So we need to encourage the breadth of conversation. And this again comes back to Ammon's point and your point about universities becoming more and more myopic. Being a scholar used to be, you know, a privilege. You were given time to reflect and think. And if you produced a book every 10 years, you know, okay, it was a bit slow, but, you know, is it a good book? Has it got ideas in it? Do people like it? Is it helping them in the way they understand the world? And we need to get back to that kind of thinking in institutions, because it's that kind of institutions that actually does have impact. The myopic cookie cutter journal article has zero impact on the world, but a good book that's been gestated over many years with a lot of novel thinking in it really does. And So if universities are to fulfill their missions of having an impact on society, they need to get their head out of the trough and look at the stars, mixing my metaphors.
Great
question.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Tim, for taking the conversation in a slightly different direction and provoking a lot of interesting thoughts. We'll move over to Marina now. If you can give us your reflections and some of your thoughts about the questions I asked at the beginning.
Thank you for having me to celebrate this the achievement Mark has made in his career. So I've known Mark for almost 30 years. I started as his MBA student, and then decided to pursue a PhD, and Mark was my supervisor. So Mark has demonstrated how collaboration is important. During all those years I have been working with him. So he is, I think, two things I stand out when I'm reflecting on the collaborative history I have had with Mark. So first is starting from even when I was a PhD student of his, he's always asking very challenging questions. So why this matters? So what critical ideas you want to share, you want to communicate? So I was sort of very confident, and then knocked back by him, and that forced me to think really deep and sometimes out of box. But that obviously helped me to develop a better crafting skills in writing. So that's kind of quite important. And the second thing, I think he often asks, even when we're working on writings, he's asking, so what impacts these ideas would have? So that also forced me to think out of the box and making actually career changes. So I moved from a very traditional academic track to now in the research only role. So I'm writing a lot of commentary and analysis pieces, basically facing the audience, a general audience. So initially I felt a bit of frustrated because my passion is really in technology. So when I talk about technology, and people often say, hey, wait a minute, can you talk about something else? And I'm still learning anyway. So that's the reflection. In terms of questions, my training, I was trained as in biological science, and I worked for IBM and Ericsson, both top tech companies of their times. And then I'm really interested in how technology has become a center in the geopolitics now. So technologies actually have national boundaries. And using AI as example, I mean, in the rivalry between the US and China, we can see, well, not a lot of things actually can be shared. Not just technologies, but also innovation policies, innovation strategies. Those are country and company bounded. And another thing I would add to what Tim just said, or Mark mentioned as well, is not just technological advancement that forces to rethink innovation policy and innovation strategies. It's geopolitical landscape changes. So I remember when I did the course with Mark as an MBA student, he was talking about just-in-time supply chain management and inventory management. And we all know what happened during the COVID, and obviously just-in-time supply chain wouldn't work. And we know we're all moving back to a kind of redundancy in supply chains, in inventories, just in case, and just in the worst case. So, so in this kind of environment, I just want to ask Mark and everybody else sitting here as innovation scholars, how we move forward. I mean, in the area where technology is essential for human advancement and let's talk about climate change, let's talk about healthcare, and all those very important issues. But on the other hand, every country wants to develop kind of technology sovereignty. How we move forward? That's first question. The second question, specifically, are we all ready for the danger of unknown technologies such as AI? And I just would want to know your thinking on those lines. Thank you.
Mark, over to you.
Oh, Marina always asks hard questions, and the big question.
Learn from you.
The future of China-American relations, the future of technology, the future of AI. Just a few brief answers to that. Yes, we are in a difficult situation, and the work that you've been doing on the Chinese American trade tensions over technology is really, really revealing in areas like semiconductors and rare earths and EVs, all these technologies which are crucial for the future, and the real tensions they produce. And yes, there is increasing techno-nationalism. Technology is more and more introspective at a time when it should become more international. So I think what we have to do is we have to look for examples where global collaboration has actually worked and benefited. And although the COVID crisis was not the greatest example of international collaboration, there was international collaboration. There was the sharing of data. There was the global dispersion of vaccine production. So there was internationalization around a common crisis. I mentioned CFCs in refrigerators, chlorofluorocarbons, and we discovered decades ago that they were destroying the ozone layer. And the world community got together and said, this is a hell of a problem, we've got to ban CFCs. And the world community banned CFCs. And the ozone layer kind of repaired itself. So there are examples where this can happen. We are in a very fractious world, but the challenges are so existential, and politicians may say, you know, they bang their nationalistic drums and wave the flag and so forth. But politicians, in the end, in most countries, have to respond to what society and citizens want. And in climate change in particular, people's experience, day-to-day experience of climate change is real. We know the climate is changing. We feel the temperature differences. We experience more floods, more storms, more droughts. So we know something's happening. And as that crisis, which is much more latent than the health crisis of COVID, once that actually builds into a crescendo, then politicians have to respond. And the only response has to be global, because otherwise there's no response. So it's, in order to be able to get to that position, we just need to continually emphasize the nature of the challenge, the extent of the challenge, and the necessity of a global response to the challenge. And that means politicians, policymakers, companies working together on a shared agenda around, in this case, the climate crisis. So that may be an example, but you do ask very, very hard questions. On the future of AI, as I said, well, you know, if we look at past experiences, people will say, well, AI it's different. And people said that during the microelectronics revolution. And if we look back at the Industrial Revolution and the development of steam power, how dramatic that was for people and the massive social consequences that had. So we've been through it before. Can we learn the lessons? Can we draw on past experiences? I hope so. I hope we model through. There won't be a clean solution. It'll be a series of compromises. But the academic has really, really important role in collecting evidence, presenting evidence, collating, collaborating, communicating all that evidence. I just remembered, they're just some vague observations, Marina. There's no other alternative to saying policymakers need a global response and we need to muddle through. That's the best I can come up with. But there was a specific question that Tim asked that I didn't respond to, that I guess has been, Ammon also had. It was about advice to young academics about how they deal with this duality of having to deal with the limited measures in which they're measured and the challenges, the big challenges that I'm sure they would like to contribute to answering. And I guess it's very, very hard, but the answer lies in some kind of portfolio approach. You have to think in terms of a portfolio of the work that you do, some of which will be necessary for you to continue in your career, to get tenure and promotions and continue to get a salary and so on. But there's other parts of your portfolio which can be more speculative, like a traditional financial or an innovation portfolio, where you can take time out and pose the big questions, ask the big questions, and think about, for example, how do all these small projects that I'm doing combine to be able to answer a larger question? And if you have that big question in mind, how do the small projects you work on feed into that big question? So it's an extent, it's a bit of a portfolio management question, and it's one that continually confronts researchers who are on short-term contracts, as I was for many years and many other people were for many years. You need to think about, okay, how do I win enough grants and publish enough to be able to put food on the table, but how do I combine those projects, enable to pull together to write a book or to make some larger contribution? So I think portfolio management is an important aspect of a future academic career.
Thank you. So you're very optimistic. So last thing, you need to stay and you can't retire yet. So because we need to fight this battle together.
Yeah,
I rely on you to do that, Marina, because Marina's many skills is a capacity to traverse the worlds of the West and China, and absolutely brilliant at being able to explain what really goes on in China. And I've learned so much from you. So although I spent time in China, when we did our book on China's innovation system, I sort of entered into it with the view that China is all top-down, state-led. It's all a question of the central government determining where the economy was going. But you really, really taught me that, yes, that happens, but entrepreneurs matter. It's a market-driven system with entrepreneurs bubbling along, having all their ideas in a Schumpeterian sense. And the Chinese economy is a mixture of top-down and bottom-up. And we really need to understand that.
Okay, I'm going to have to close this bit here now because in the interest of time, we've got some questions coming from the audience. But I just want to thank the panel for, Ammon, Tim, and Marina for, introducing sort of different questions. Each of them really, really interesting in terms of early career research, how we have impact conversations at scale, and the kind of geopolitics that people face. And Mark, thank you for your response as well. So we're going to open it up to some questions, and I think Dilupa, you're going to be collecting some of those questions, and we're going to ask Mark for his responses, if that's okay.
Sure, Andrew, thank you. So let's open the floor to the questions. And yes, we have got several questions already, and some of them have been partially touched by Mark in the conversation already. So can I invite Narelle first to ask the question on translating research, please?
Yeah, hi, Mark. Great,
Narelle.
great to be here. My question's about the importance of intermediaries. Particularly, I talked about in translating research to make it meaningful to other audiences. But in the last little conversation, I'd expand that question to intermediaries as cultural bridge builders, and maybe even communities of practice that are about bringing together mavericks, rogues, and rebels. Because it seems to me that your portfolio idea is about being a mild-mannered academic by day or a responsible business leader by day, and at other times being able to be a maverick, a dissident, and ask the tough questions and think through other unimagined ways of going forward and being a bit on the edge. So how important are intermediaries and investment in them?
Great question, Narelle. For people who don't know Narelle ran for many years, formed and created one of the major think tanks in Australia, the Australian Business Foundation, and did really valuable work on sponsoring research that led to very different conversations in Australia about innovation and industry development. Yeah, I mean, I go back to a book that John Bessent and I wrote many years ago called Effective Innovation Policy. And that was all about intermediaries and how they play a crucial role in connecting research and universities with businesses. And they are essential in being able to combine the demands from industry and be able to collate them and curate them in a way that's understood by universities. And they're also good at interpreting university activities and research back into industry. So they're a very valuable conduit between the two. They're a bridge between the two cultures of people who are driven by curiosity and people who are driven by profit and growth. So, but they take very different forms. Some of them are very structured organizations like the research and technology organizations in the UK that have been around, and research associations that have been around for 100 years or more, that undertake collaborative industry research, where they are expert at being able to understand the diverse range of challenges, but common challenges in industry, and get researchers to work on that. And similarly, they're very good at interpreting what research means for industry and feeding it back into industry. So you have that. You have a lot of regional-based organizations. Germany is a classic case, which has got a combination of things like the Fraunhofer Institutes of intermediaries, but they've also got local area institutions, technology transfer organizations. They've got chambers of commerce, which play a very important role. And you've got these sort of formal institutions, but you've also got the important role that can be taken by consultants, professional services. But people who are the bees that cross-pollinate ideas and jump from place to place by bringing new ideas to new places, and based on their experience, know what will work and what won't work. I think one of the key aspects of intermediary is, you need that expertise, you need that capability, you need to be able to interpret and communicate effectively and so on. But you also need continuity. One of the great challenges of Australian policy is that everything's changed every 3 years at the election. And the great strength of countries, Scandinavian countries and Germany, is the continuity of these intermediaries. So they become trusted in the system. People know them, people know the people in them, people have a good experience of them, and are used to how they work and the sort of contributions they can make. So going back to the book that John and I wrote, intermediaries are an essential element of any innovation system. They take all sorts of different forms, but their contribution depends on the skill levels they have, the capabilities they have, and their continuity in the way that it helps build trust within the system. Thank you, Narelle.
Thank you, Narelle, and thank you, Mark, for the answer. Now, the second question comes from Tim Brady. It's about current researchers having a too narrow focus. So over to you, Tim. Tim, we can't hear you.
Yeah, okay, forgot to unmute. Being really ancient, I'm not completely au fait with the technology, but delighted to be here. Mark, thank you so much for your interview. It brought back lots of memories about Sprue and the openness that we experienced there. And as you mentioned, as Ben has mentioned as well, the different seminars where you were open to ideas from other sub-disciplines within Sprue. I also remember us having informal groups as well. Dan Jones, Ian Miles, myself, we had a kind of science fiction reading group as well, which opened us up to broader ideas about innovation, if you like. And a lot of those things we read, in particular Philip K. Dick, were almost premonitions of what would happen in the future. So my question is really, do you think the emphasis on smaller and smaller sub-disciplines within innovation is detrimental to career development and understanding about these broader questions? And if so, how do we resolve that?
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. I think I was a member of, we were members of a drinking group that had a very detrimental effect on our intellectual, it had a detrimental effect on our brains, but had probably a beneficial impact on our ideas, because in Vino Veritas, we talk a lot, mainly rubbish, but we would talk about ideas. And, we wouldn't, when we went to the pub, we wouldn't just talk about football. We would talk about the projects we were working on, and we would talk about the future of skills or whatever it was. But there was that capacity as well. It's a common question that obviously everyone's preoccupied now about: how do we create an environment that scholarship can thrive rather than paper production? And particularly given the audience, how do we maintain that in innovation studies? I mean, innovation is so important. It's so crucial. As I started off, it's good and it's bad, but it will determine our future. I had a great day yesterday. I had my third grandson delivered, was born yesterday, and I reflected on what world is going to be like for him. How is his world going to change? Well, innovation is going to change his world, if there is a world. But innovation is crucial to that. And in order to be able to understand it, shape it, hopefully move it in a more positive direction, we need people who can research it properly, understand its interdisciplinarity, understand the connections between politics and politicians and policy, and decisions in firms, and people's careers and people's motivations, all these things that combine to be able to create innovation. And our present system is not structured to be able to support that kind of work and that kind of thinking. And university leaders, deans, have to start pushing back against some of the quantification fetish that's been thrust upon them by government and perhaps too easily accepted by university leaders. They need to push back and say the challenges that are faced are existential. The challenges we face are enormous, and we can't address them if you keep on sticking us in these little boxes. If you keep on making us do these silly little projects and chasing this kind of work. We need space. We need freedom. We need academic freedom. So get off our backs and let us deal with it. And as a kind of aside, I'm kind of getting more and more anti the idea of missions as policy, and more returning to the old Haldane principle that the best decisions about research priority are made by researchers themselves. And we need to return to that old tradition of scholars with autonomy, being able to themselves determine what their priorities are. It's attractive for researchers, and it will lead to better outcomes for researchers. How we get there, we just have to keep on beating the drum. But innovation is a classic case of a subject that needs that freedom, that interdisciplinarity, that capacity to talk across boundaries, that capacity to take the big picture. So in a sense, we're in the vanguard, and we have to keep on banging the drum about how important it is to preserve those aspects of scholarship and academia that can actually make a contribution.
Well said, Mark. Thank you. And thank you, Tim, for the question. And the next one comes from Helen Barry. It's about metrics for corporate innovation. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you, Mark, and everyone on the call today. So my name's Helene, and I'm not an innovation scholar. I actually work in a corporate global consulting firm. And for us, we've got this really strong commitment to delivering innovative and sustainable solutions to complex mega challenges around the world. We're also running different corporate innovation programs through the organization. And I love this conversation today because it's great for me. I'm also a student as well through UQ, learning about innovation, but it's great to be able to hear your experiences from a research perspective and some of the challenges that you're facing, and then thinking about that from my world with corporate innovation and how some of those areas mix. So one of my questions was, based on your experience, Mark, what would you consider the most critical metrics for assessing and tracking innovation within corporate settings?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And my first answer, all of those questions, is to look at John Besant's blog. John is a fountain of expertise and knowledge, and absolutely brilliant at being able to articulate and explain a lot of the issues around innovation. So I'd have a look at his blog, and particularly some of the work they've done on indicators and assessing indicators in corporates. I mean, it's very difficult because most decision makers in large corporates are not scientists or engineers or innovation people. There may be some engineers, but they're mainly lawyers and accountants. And they have a different approach to risk, for example. It's investment is risk. It's not providing opportunities for the future. And I mean, one of the people I worked with quite a lot was the ex-R&D director of IBM, Irving Wolodarski-Berger, great man. And he basically said, every time I'm asked by my board to justify my R&D budget, he said, it's an invitation to lie, because I have no idea what the impact of this investment is going to be. So I make up some numbers and I get justified. When I was on the board of Nestle, there was a big process. Nestle is a very mechanically run organization, like a Swiss watch. Everything is done to structure and order. And the R&D director used to make very carefully calculated decisions based on a lot of data about where investment should be and what the returns may be in the future. But when you actually looked at real decision, the classic case in Nestle was the development of the Nespresso capsule machine, which every indicator said, you shouldn't do this. It's losing money. London Business School produced a case study of Nespresso being the worst investment in product development in history. And at one stage, the head of R&D had to go and see the chairman, the CEO, and said, okay, the data's not looking great, but I believe in this product and I want more money. I think it was something like 40 million more Swiss francs, a lot of money. And the CEO said, okay, all the data is saying this, but you, someone I trust and know, based on your experience, are telling me this is going to work. You've got a gut feeling this is going to work. You've got the money. And he went away, and it was the largest product success in Nestlé's history. It's $1 billion business in a year. So you have to be very wary of the kind of indicators that are used. They can be used to justify, and they provide some kind of framework, but they're not the be all and end all. I don't think there's any substitute for gut feeling in many of these discussions. But do have a look at the blog of John Besant, who's got lots of answers to those sort of questions.
I will. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question comes from Ben Martin, and it's again about the Sprue culture, collaborative mechanisms. Over to you, Ben.
Right. Well, it follows on a bit from Tim's question, and I just want to say a little bit word about the people getting narrower. I'm conscious of the earlier remark about us older generation not telling the younger generation just to do what we did because things have moved on. I'm aware that things have got a lot more competitive and that younger researchers, unlike us when the field was relatively new, are coming into a field where there's been 50 or 60 years of work. It's harder to find new areas. And the message normally is go narrower and deeper. And I think one thing that also encourages that quite strongly is our search techniques when we're doing research. Now, with a few keywords, I can find any article that I want, whereas 30 years ago, you would build up a list of interesting looking references, and every so often you'd trot off to the library to try and find those. And in doing so, you'd come across other articles in that journal or that book, which were of interest, which would take you off in a different direction. They were a different perspective, a different theory, a different methodology. We lose that now with the aid of Google Scholar. We go straight to things on exactly that topic. And therefore, all the pressures are to go narrow and deeper. But I wanted to come back to Tim's point about the early Sprue culture, and he mentioned that the seminars. Mark, you mentioned, how this was a good culture. And I think we're all agreed on that, although we're obviously a rather biased set. What mechanisms do you think contributed to that besides the seminars? What can other organizations learn about that? You, I think, perhaps indirectly contrasted Sprue with other institutions. I remember you talking about, perhaps you won't mind me saying this, about your PhD and how some of your ideas perhaps got purloined by somebody else. I would like to think that would never happen in Sprue. So what can you tell us about the mechanisms, which I've often called the social glue mechanisms, that existed, and what can other organizations learn about these?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We keep on returning to this because it is so crucial. I think recruitment is obviously important, and getting people whose faces fit, people who are collaborative. If you've got a choice when you're selecting someone who's obviously intellectually more brilliant, but probably a sociopath. I mean, the tendency is to appoint the brilliant person because they produce more papers, whereas you might get someone who perhaps haven't got the motor skills but have got personal social skills and can encourage and cement people. And having a balance in the group of people, and there are some people who are just social beings. They connect people. They're boundary spanners. They're the bees that cross-pollinate, and they may not be the most productive in terms of publications, but they play a hugely important role in communicating ideas. I mean, a classic example, I'll personalize this, and Ian Miles, who was at Sprue at the same time, and he published a lot, but he was brilliant at being able to communicate across. And he'd go and read something, and he'd come across and say, I read this. Do you think it's interesting? and he would cross-pollinate. And so that sort of person is really important. I mean, Ian was so well read. You'd go into him and you say, Ian, I'm thinking about something and I read something. I can't remember what it is, or I can't remember what it's about, but can you tell me what it was? And he'd tell you exactly what it was that you wanted to know. Yeah, you need that balance of people. There's the social side. You know, there were social parties, and there were Tim's special group on science fiction, and there were, you know, the social side was really important, the social capital that was in there, and that's a function of leadership. But it's also comes crucially back to the question of selection. We don't do enough research into the people we appoint, and appointing the wrong person can be disastrous. I've done it myself, and it's been awful, and it takes a lot of getting out of. So when you're appointing someone, you know, make sure that you have researched their past behaviours and know that they will fit in the culture of your organisation. So, and other people have talked about some of the things that can be done. But the idea of those conversations across discipline, the idea of social occasions where people get to know about one another and where we're coming from, our histories, our families, and all those sort of things, they all matter. They all matter. I mean, you faced this as director of Sprue for many years, so I'm telling you how to do things. But this is we're not as good as we should be at firstly recruiting the right people, and then giving them the time and space to be able to develop their ideas. And that is a question of the strength of the managers of those people to be able to defend them. And we have to become better at being able to explain to whether it's a dean or a pro-vice chancellor or a vice chancellor about why their performance might not be up to scratch in their particular indicators for a period of time. We need to understand the strength of their ideas and explain the importance of their ideas. So deans need to become a bit more strong-willed, develop a backbone.
Thank you, Mark. Next question or a comment comes from Mamo. Mochi. I can't see Mochi. If Mamo, are you in the audience? If you are, please ask question. I think it's more of a comment there. We can move on to the next question from Justine. So Justine, please ask your question about the solutions going beyond borders and the general potential partners, please. Thank you. Is Justine in the audience?
I think it's getting late, particularly for our poor people, long suffering in Australia.
Okay, is it okay now? Okay.
Yes, please, go ahead.
I'm Justine, a PhD student. It feels great. Yeah, it feels great seeing people that you read about in literature, seeing them physically. So it's great to see you, Mark. It's great to see you, Andrew. I've been reading a lot about your work. So my question goes to Mark, basically, and to be brief, I just wanted to know a little bit about your scaling plan. Of course, you've along the way, you've come up with quite a lot of innovative ideas. So I've just been wondering what has been included in your scaling plan. How have you been able to create linkages and expand those linkages? Thank you.
Thank you, Justine. It's a very good and important question. And it goes back to the importance of being able to communicate your ideas. You know, your ideas, and how, if you have any ideas, it's important to get them out there and to scale them, as you put it. And I suspect the biggest impact I've ever had is through some of the radio programs that I've done. I've done a lot of radio programs, and probably the most influential radio program was one I did on failure and the importance in failure. And I think every failure in Australia and many adjacent countries wrote to me afterwards, congratulating me on saying, thank you for justifying my life. So I was a big hit on failure. But I think there are different ways of communicating. And we've talked about how Tim and his blog gets huge impact, and John Besant's webpage and blog, huge impact, and that's a fantastic way of scaling ideas. And we talked about Ammon and the way that his stellar publications career and the way that he gets really top ideas and produces really thoughtful and informative work, and how that influences other academics and their subsequent work and influences policymakers. And we talked about how Marina and her sort of thought pieces, and she's always on Bloomberg TV and commentating on this, that, and the other. And there's different ways of being able to scale the ideas. But it comes back to the question, and the important lesson I learned from Roy Rothwell is research is useless if it sits on a shelf. If you've done work which is interesting and valuable and something to say, get it out there. Tell people, communicate it in any way, but share it. Get that knowledge out there. So, thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
All right, so I know that we have gone beyond time by 12 minutes now, but it seems like we are going to cover all questions, important questions, and we have one more coming from Rajesh about the innovativeness of Australia. Over to you, Rajesh.
Thanks, Mark, Andrew, Tim, Marina, Ammon, and Dilupa for that great conversation. Congratulations. Mine is a delinquent question. As per the Global Innovation Index 2023, Australia ranks 24th behind South Korea, China, and Israel, etc. As per Forbes Happiness Index, Australia ranks 10th, and none of those countries are anywhere near. Australians seem to be happy, but not highly innovative. Do you think this is okay? Has Australia achieved a balance between being innovative and happy? Has it at last become a lucky country? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, we could talk for hours about this, and of course, the lucky country is actually an ironic term. I suspect there's a lot more innovation in Australia than is actually captured by the indicators. I think there's a lot of small firms, there's a lot of individuals, there's a lot of brilliant adaptation of innovations that are used across industry. So I suspect the indicators are a little bit skewed given our economy. Are we a happy country? Definitely. I'm in Britain at the moment and nothing works. The health system's broken, infrastructure's broken, political system is broken. It's a mess. And when I go back to Australia, it's taken for granted in Australia, but a lot of things work there, and a lot of things that are struggling elsewhere in the world. And people have a good quality of life generally, and that's a remarkable thing. So I think, innovation is important. And I think there are ways, if we were to change the way we measure it, you'd see Australia being quite an innovative country. But what really matters is quality of life, quality and quantity of life. Innovation can contribute to that. And that if Australia is good at it, long may it last. It's the greatest country in the world.
Thank you, Mark. So we have one last question coming from Ammon about small and medium-sized countries. Over to you, Ammon.
Yeah, I just wondered if Mark could talk about his experience in policy in a country like Australia or Canada or the UK, with these sort of small, medium-sized countries, which have great ambitions for innovation. They want to be the next innovation superpower. Certainly that's the UK's slogan of the day. But they're totally unrealistic in their expectations. Their timescales are too short. They tend to fetishize, particular league tables or a particular country who got lucky with one company for a period of time and think that that's the secret sauce and we have to copy what they do. And then they do some kind of small policy, which is maybe beneficial, but, it's not going to have, the impact that they're expecting. So for example, Canada's launching an innovation agency and the expectations are very high for that. We have one in the UK now for 15 years. It's great. It does a lot of useful things, but it ain't going to change it's not a game changer. So my question is how you get the balance right with these policymakers in terms of encouraging them to support innovation, but also aligning their expectations with what is realistic and achievable.
Sure. Well, I mean, you start with looking at what are the contributors to a successful economy. And they include, workforce skills, they include infrastructure, they include a good research base, they include large corporations with international reach, they include small entrepreneurial firms, all those indicators. And you see some small countries focusing on one particular element of that. So, for example, in Taiwan, the Taiwanese economy, small economy, was built around small firms, small high-tech firms with links into research institute. You look at, for example, Singapore. Singapore was based around investment in human capital and attracting direct foreign investment for multinationals to help you connect into global networks. If you can include Korea anymore as a small country. When I first went to Korea, Korea was a very small and poor country. Now it's a very rich country with GDP per capita higher than Japan. But they based their economy around large firms, the chaebol. So there are different ways of doing it. The question is that significant? Is that enough to be able to do it in the sort of deglobalizing world where you need all the other connections that Marina talked about? Is it sufficient, or do you have to do everything? And one of the great lessons I've taken from China, for example, definitely not a small country, is the way that it took lessons from all of those different nations. So it looked at Korea for the chaebol and the way that it reformed its state-owned enterprises. It looked at Taiwan, encouraging small firms through special enterprise zones. It looked at even Australia and the power of its research base. And it looked at Singapore in terms of attracting foreign direct investment, the Apples and the Teslas and so forth. So I think it's a really, really interesting question about whether in this current era of, call it deglobalization, techno-nationalism or whatever, whether small countries can specialize or whether they need to become more resilient by being able to cover all of those elements of the innovation system. I think it's an open question, but we have seen examples of small firms, small countries being able to use a particular formula to be able to achieve great success. The question is whether that's still maintainable in the current environment. So it doesn't answer your question, but it answers more questions around it.
Thank you. So now we are coming close to the end of this session. I would like to now invite Andrew to briefly summarize the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, very happy to do that. I probably can't summarize it. It's been so diverse and interesting and covered everything from Philip K. Dick to sport to global politics and everything else. But what I've taken out, first of all, I want to thank the panelists for providing quite different, thoughtful, interesting, and raising also lots of questions. But I'd really like to thank Mark for his wonderful, clear. He writes pretty well, everybody knows that, but he speaks so clearly and thoughtfully, and you're so articulate, Mark. It's wonderful to listen to you. I've really enjoyed this, and I'm sure everybody else has as well. So it's not just your insights intellectually, but it's just the way you are as a person. And I remember we wrote a chapter on innovation in mega projects, and just to give you an illustration of how Mark is as a collaborator, I said to him, we met in my office, I was at UCL at the time, and I said, look, I think this could be an article in MIT Sloan Management Review. We've got some great, sort of interesting, thoughtful ideas. He took it away. Within 2 weeks, he came back with this beautifully well-written article for MIT Sloan Management Review. We literally had to do nothing else, And I think anybody who's collaborated with Mark knows that and it was fun. We had a lot of fun. And we did something interesting, and it's had some influence. And it's just one example, and I'm sure everybody who's worked with him have got their examples. But big vote of thanks for you, Mark, and your career, and a celebration of your career. It's been an honour to be involved in this.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we are now concluding this session. Goodbye, everyone, and until we meet in the next session of the In Conversation series. Reminding again, it's on the 23rd of April, featuring Beth Martin. Cheers.
Thank you.